Hi, and welcome back to this Monday edition of Focal Point on AFR Talk. You are listening to Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio, talking about the absolute Chernobyl care meltdown we're having with Obamacare and the effort on the part of Congress to stop this thing in its tracks. Now, the House voted on Thursday to fund all of government, but to defund all of Obamacare, not one red cent. In the continuing resolution, the appropriations bill for Obamacare funds government through the middle of December. Now, that bill is over on the Senate side. We'll talk about that more as the program develops about the role of the filibuster in that. We really need to have senators called by their constituents and say, look, support the filibuster. The way you end the filibuster is with what's called a cloture vote. Cloture related to the verb to close. That's how you close debate. And we don't want debate closed on that thing. We want a filibuster. So we're urging senators, if you get 41 senators that will not end debate, then that filibuster, it just stops that bill dead in its tracks. So that's what we want. I'll identify some of the senators that are apparently going to be likely to not vote to end, or to vote for cloture. That's a vote for Obamacare, essentially. But one of the questions that comes up in all of this is what happens if they cannot come up with a continuing resolution they agree to by September 30 and the government shuts down. Now, everybody cites that as the boogeyman out there. Look, we can't let the government shut down. This is catastrophe is going to happen. That catastrophe has happened. Whatever happens, we cannot let the government shut down. So I think it's worth exploring just for a minute. My next guest is going to help us do that. Exploring for a minute what actually gets shut down when the government gets shut down. And here with me to help sort through all of that is Hans von Spakovsky. Hans is a senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation, former Justice Department lawyer, knows what he's talking about, a great resource, often read his stuff, and a frequent guest on this program. Hans, welcome back to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
Well, Brian, thanks for having me.
Well, Hans, I just love what you've done here. Got a paper up at Heritage Foundation. And the title of the piece is What Happens During a Government Shutdown? So,
Yeah,
Hans, tell us, what happens during a government shutdown?
Well, not a whole lot.
That's the beauty of this piece.
Yeah, in fact, look, the Justice Department itself put out this memo back in '95 saying that, using the word shutdown is actually a misnomer because, as the DOJ said, the federal government will not truly be shut down. There was a memo that was done by David Stockman. Remember him? He was the budget director for Reagan early in Reagan's term that laid out what happens when the government doesn't have money because Congress hasn't passed an appropriations bill or CR. And all this stuff keeps going. I mean, for example, the president's authority with national security and foreign relations continues. Benefit payments all keep going out, Social Security, veterans benefits. Airplanes don't stop flying. People know the government runs the air traffic control system. Air traffic controllers keep working. We don't simply tell our border guys to go home and open up the borders. The borders and customs protection still happens. We don't suddenly open up federal prisons and let out everyone. That all continues. I mean, there's just one thing after another. All things that are considered emergencies, things necessary for safety of human life and property, that all keeps going.
Well, and this is significant, Hans, I think, in this overall debate, regardless of what everybody thinks about the House bill. I mean, I like it. I support it. We as an organization encouraged congressmen, encouraged our network to contact your congressman, get them to vote for this bill to defund Obamacare. All the Republicans did. They hung together. We're sending the same message over to the Senate. We want this thing stopped. But regardless of what you think about all of that, what we're always told, and I've had Republican congressmen tell me this, Hans. I've had Republican congressmen tell me that we can't let the government shut down because the Social Security checks won't go out. We got to keep making sure that our members of the military get paid. We can't let Medicare reimbursements come to a screeching halt. And so Republican congressmen are the ones that are always citing this litany of horribles as the reason why we've got to cave on a budget or cave on a continuing resolution or cave on the debt ceiling. That's a separate issue. Let's not get into that. but why they always want to cave on budget issues. We got to do something because we can't let the government shut down. And I want to reiterate or have you review for us, Hans. The reality is, tell us what happens. You did before, but I want to tack it down. What happens with Social Security? What happens with Medicare? What happens with national defense?
Those benefit payments, particularly let's talk about Social Security, they keep going. Folks can look back at the 1995 shutdown. Remember, there was a confrontation between Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich, who was still Speaker of the House, over balancing the budget. And during the shutdown, the Social Security Administration kept 80% of its folks working. They were all considered emergency employees necessary to keep having Social Security benefits go out. For the 5 days that one of the shutdowns occurred, remember back then we had about 4.5 million employees. Only 800,000 employees were furloughed. All the rest kept working because they were all considered necessary.
You know, and by the way, I've got a link to Hans' piece on my Twitter feed. Go to Brian J. Fisher. If you haven't joined Twitter yet, go to Brian J. Fisher and become a follower. I sent out a link to this piece. In fact, it's so important, I sent it out twice. So Hans, over the weekend and then again this morning, Hans, let me ask you this question. How do you explain, I mean, this is not a secret. I mean, we know what happened in 1995. The government actually did not shut down. So how do you explain that so many Republicans in the Congress seem to want to trot this out as their justification for caving on budget bills?
Well, unfortunately, there are too many folks in Washington that believe the stories put out by the Washington Post and the mainstream media, which, as everyone knows, is very left-wing. And look, this is the same story the president has been pushing. Remember, it wasn't too long ago that we had exactly the same kind of the sky is falling in language if the sequester went into force. And what happened? The sequester went into force, and have you noticed any real change or cut down in government services? Why, no, we haven't. Now, look, the president will do things like he'll close the Washington Monument and the national parks because that's very visible to people. Those aren't emergency situations that require federal government to keep employing to keep the parks open. So he will try to make it as painful as he can for American citizens. But frankly, if it means I can't go to see the Washington Monument for a couple of days, and that might get Obamacare stopped, I'm willing to live with that.
Well, you know, and President Obama, without needing to, blaming it on the sequester, shut down White House tours. You haven't had White House tours since March. The American people have adapted to that. They've adjusted. You know, the Washington Monument's closed right now for repairs. So I think the American people would be able to handle that, particularly, as you say, if the exchange was getting rid of Obamacare. Now, here's an interesting thing to me, Hans. This kind of cracks me up, and I wonder if part of the fear in D.C. is that politicians are afraid that the American people will realize how little impact a government shutdown actually has, because the way this thing runs is all of the essential, or I think the word is crucial in the piece that came out, crucial services will continue without interruption. I think that's the phrase that you used. So the idea is you want to keep essential services going. And Hans, I guess my reaction to that, okay, so we're going to have essential services continue in the case of a government shutdown, and all of the non-essential services of government, all the services of government that even the people that put this stuff together says we don't really need, they're not critical, they're not crucial, they're not essential. In fact, I've got a wringing of the hands piece here about the head of the Environmental Protection Agency, says that her agency will, quote, effectively shut down unless Congress approves stopgap funding by October 1. Most of us would be happy to see the EPA go away. I mean, EPA,
look.
So that's a question. We don't.
I agree with that. I mean, the EPA has caused so many problems. They have overregulated, gone far beyond what they're supposed to be doing. Look, we have a cleaner environment today than we've had since those laws were first passed 40 years ago, and yet they keep putting in even more burdensome regulations.
And so, if it's essential government services that shut down in a shutdown, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, Hans, that's what we want. We don't want government doing anything that isn't essential to our security, national defense, and law enforcement.
Yeah, no, and I think you're actually right about that. For example, I'll tell you this. Listen, I'd be willing to bet you that if the entire Federal Department of Education shut down completely, the average American and their kids in school wouldn't notice that anywhere around the country. Would make no difference in their everyday lives, other than you'd have one less federal government interfering with local control over the education of their kids.
Now, one last question. How, this piece that you've done, great position paper, have you guys distributed this to the members of Congress? From your understanding, Hans, how many, got 535 members of Congress, how many of those congressmen know this information and maybe are hoping the American people won't find out that they've been told?
Well, we distribute, Heritage has a standard rule that whenever we do any kind of paper like this, we distribute it to all the members of Congress so everyone gets it. Look, there has been a change. Remember, a month or so ago, the leadership on the House side was saying they weren't going to do this, have a vote like this, and yet what that happened this week, they changed their minds, and they did have a vote to defund Obamacare, yet fund the rest of the government.
Our guest has been Hans von Spakovsky. He's a senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Got a great piece. Former Justice Department lawyer. Got a great piece. What happens during a government shutdown? The answer is not much. Social Security checks keep going out. Medicare reimbursements keep going out. The military keeps getting paid. All of the essential services of government continue to hum right along. And don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, that revenue continues to roll right into the federal government because they still are going to send our withholding into the federal government. It's going to have an ongoing stream of revenue to take care of these essential functions. Hans, thanks again for taking time with us. Great piece. Appreciate your time and expertise.
Happy to do it anytime.
Hans von Spakovsky from the Heritage Foundation. Focal Point AFR Talk, so don't let them lie to you. Social Security checks go out, Medicare reimbursements go out, the military keeps getting paid, veterans benefits go out.